The Beatles and U2 are influential and inspirational bands which have stayed relevant for decades. Today, we'll be able to look at both bands through time and how they affected the culture both back then and today. Let's start with the Beatles and how they came to be. The band consisted of four members: John Lennon, who was born in 1940 and was unfortunately assassinated by Mark David Chapman in 1980. Ringo Starr, who was also born in 1940 and still alive today. George Harrison, who was born in 1943 and died of cancer in 2001. And last but certainly not least, Paul McCartney, who was born in 1942 and still continues to create music with stars like Kanye West and Rihanna. Now that you've had a brief understanding of the people who encompass the Beatles, let's take a look at what they were able to do throughout the years. It all began in 1963 when the album Please Please Me was first released. Then, in 1964, Capitol Records released Meet the Beatles, which swept the nation as their groundbreaking album. Shortly after, Ed Sullivan hosted one of the most watched TV shows during the 1960s. 76 million people marveled at the television screen to watch the Beatles perform. A few years later, in 1969, the Beatles performed their very last show together before Paul McCartney left the band in 1970. About 10 years later, John Lennon is shot and killed in front of his apartment by Mark David Chapman. In 2001, after a battle with cancer, George Harrison dies, leaving only two members from the band. Then, in 2010, the entire Beatles catalog is released on iTunes, giving fans the opportunity to finally purchase, download, and enjoy the music made by such a revolutionary band. With such an iconic band sweeping the nation throughout the mid to late 60s, culture was bound to change. Things like hairstyles, clothing, and the way music was created all began to change completely, even before the Beatles touched down in the U.S. This incredible fan base the band accumulated was the driving force for its success.
Switching over to another legendary group of musicians, U2 first got started in Dublin, Ireland in the fall of 1976. After forming the group and winning a talent show held in Limerick, Ireland in 1978, the band was able to start working on a demo with CBS Records. The band consisted of four members: Larry Mullen, born in 1961, Adam Clayton, born in 1960, Paul Hewson, given the nickname Bono Vox and then later Bono, also born in 1960, and Dave Evans, born in 1961, all of which are still living, touring, and inspiring individuals with a charitable organization known as RED, which gathers funding from places like Gap, Apple, and Beats headphones and speakers. Although having two albums prior, their third album release in 1983 titled War was what set them up for success. The integration of political and religious messages stayed prevalent even in their fourth album, titled The Unforgettable Fire, which allowed them to access a new sound and point of view to display to their audience. With 4 years of creating and touring now behind them, U2's experience helped to guide them into a more charitable direction. The Live Aid concert for Ethiopians was seen by more than 1 billion people all over the world. They finally accessed even more international recognition when they released their fifth album, The Joshua Tree. People finally started to accept and understand the quote-unquote rock band with a conscience. Jumping far ahead to the year 1999, the band's success allowed them to continue to make great music while focusing heavily on HIV and AIDS relief for Africa. At the peak of their success, U2 played at the Super Bowl 36 show in early 2002. They performed 3 songs and reminded the viewing audience why, for more than 30 years, this band has been so successful. They have been able to produce, create, and enact change not only with their widely controversial albums, but also with the many charitable organizations they continue to promote today. U2 is clearly not a band that will be going away anytime soon, but when the fateful day comes, they will have one incredible legacy to leave behind.